Cool. My name's Theo Rhys, and I'm the director and co-writer of Stuffed, and you're listening to the Filmcraziest Show.
And I'm Joss Holden-Rea. I'm the co-writer and composer and lyricist for Stuffed. And yeah, you're listening to the Filmcraziest Show.
Cool. And I am Daniel, the host of the Filmcraziest Show. And just as you guys said, just so everybody knows, there might be a bit of delay because I am in Canada. You guys are somewhere in the UK. So as well as the time difference, there might be a 5-second delay instead of a 5-hour time difference.
I mean, that would be pretty. It would be a pretty bad interview if there was a 5-hour time difference, wouldn't it?
This is going to be fun. Maybe we'll start with just the premise of Stuffed, just as the crazy little musical that it is.
So Stuffed is it's a short musical film about a taxidermist who wants to find a human to stuff, and then who goes online searching for someone and finds a willing specimen by the name of Bernie, who is so afraid of aging that he decides that he wants to be stuffed and be loved forever in the taxidermist's care. And they come together, and a kind of spark ignites between the two of them as they realize that there's two people who've kind of, with these extreme desires, that have somehow found each other against all odds. So it's a love story, and it's a musical, and it's very dark and macabre, and yeah.
Okay, great. Now, I feel there's so many places I could start, but I figured I would. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in how you guys thought of the taxidermist character, but I would love to start with just for Bernie. How did that come about? Just with like thinking of the idea of someone who wants to be preserved forever.
Well, I guess the whole concept of it kind of, we knew we wanted to make something to do with taxidermy, but the whole kind of like blueprint of it kind of comes from a story we'd read about this quite famous story about this German cannibal who wanted to eat someone and found someone online who wanted to be eaten because it was kind of his fetish. And that instantly, I guess, is like the most interesting thing about why someone would want to be eaten. And it's something we've kind of, touch on the short, try and explore. But yeah, and I guess the whole kind of thinking about, because also weirdly they kind of like lived together for a little bit, for a short period of time whilst they were kind of planning the event, because they had a very specific way they wanted to do it. And for us, it was kind of just like quite funny to think about, funny and sweet and interesting to think about, like what maybe they might have talked about over dinner, or how they might have actually felt about each other, because in a way it's kind of a romantic thing, or we found it to be a romantic thing. Maybe that's just us, but we found the idea that like someone who wanted to be eaten found someone who wanted to eat someone quite a lovely concept. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's that you feel like for so many, finding someone that like fully understands you and fully gets all of your kind of quirks and all of the things that you want from life is quite kind of rare, and particularly in these extreme scenarios of these two people who want these extreme, uncomfortable, horrific things, finding each other, and they kind of finding possibly the one other person in the world that would understand them. I think particularly for Bernie's character, like it's there's so much to unpack, particularly in the original story with the cannibals, and then sort of within Bernie, but within the original story, the ideas of like not wanting to live, the ideas of wanting something to happen to you after you've died, the whole kind of sexual fetish element of there's just so much in there that's so fascinating. And I think it was really fun for us to kind of transpose that onto Bernie in our film. And once you kind of bring in the world of taxidermy as well, there's a whole kind of separate set of wants and desires and fears of aging, of growing old, and that's where it becomes quite existential. And I think that his character is quite an existential character that's sort of looking at the world and his life and questioning really whether he's happy with it and whether he can find something more meaningful.
It sounds like a really like extreme thing to want to be taxidermied or whatever, but I think accidentally through like that, it becomes quite like a very ham-fisted metaphor for like leaving something behind and legacy, and actually becomes a very relatable thing without us kind of meaning for it to be, really.
I definitely got that relatable sense of just like leaving your legacy, even though I don't think I ever want to get stuffed. So I think that's really fun that you guys put that on screen.
Thanks, man. I think it's that it definitely made sense for us, because I think, not that we were ever going to try and make the original story of the cannibal work. That was never the intention. But I think that certainly taking something like that, that's so extreme that it's really, really difficult to connect to in any way. It's sort of just macabre and horrific. Whereas I think bringing it into this world gave us a slightly more relatable and less extreme thing to want and to do. Which I think was really important, because it was important that the characters were really humanized. I think it would be very easy to make something about horrific, unhuman characters, but that was really important for us, that it wasn't kind of just something to shock, that you really saw beneath these characters' desires.
And it's really like dark and kind of moody, but it's also like kind of light and energetic in a way. What was it like finding that balance?
Well, I mean, I guess I can mostly speak musically to that, but I think the balance kind of comes from a sense of like inherently, like making a musical is a very light thing. It's kind of like a light-hearted kind of genre, I guess, and like it comes with certain tropes of like the certain kind of types of sounds and songs that you hear. And I think we were desperate not to do that, not to have like a very like kind of shiny kind of Broadway kind of sound. But I think we kind of can't really help ourselves, or I can't help myself as a composer, and that stuff just kind of comes through. So I think some of the light and shade comes from attempting to make something that feels like darker and more moody and more atonal, but then kind of just exploding out into kind of like fun Broadway moments at the same time.
I think we wanted the music, our original references with the tone of the music specifically, which obviously brings not a lot of the darkness necessarily, but brings a lot of the emotional moments and a lot of the feeling to the film. The reference points from the beginning was some very sort of dark cinematic pieces of music, and sort of starting from that as a basis. What felt really nice was then moving that into these kind of like whimsical, more kind of Broadway sounds briefly, with their excitement, build with their excitement. So a kind of good reference, a good example of that was like, there's a scene in the film where they're prepping to stuff Bernie, or they're prepping to work out how they might do it. And it's really, obviously there's a lot of darkness in what they're talking about and the subject of the song. And it's a really brutal, chugging, intense sound that the song starts with. But as the two of them kind of come together and start falling for each other and start becoming excited about what's going to happen, the song builds and becomes this like really joyous and brief, just for a brief moment, kind of leaves the sort of dark world behind and becomes this kind of like light, playful, musical moment. And I think that was really important for us, not to kind of, completely leave behind the good parts of what a musical does, which is rile you up and make you really excited and kind of joyful about something. So I think it was finding that balance between the two. I think also the nature of, it's a really dark subject matter, and in terms of the production design treatment and the way that we wanted to make this, it felt like a happening that occurred, in a quiet house in the countryside. It's kind of, there's like a dark fairy tale vibe to it. And I think mixing that with the fact that it's musical and immediately kind of gives this play of two sides of the coin, it kind of gives a slightly lighter, more whimsical nature to it, whilst keeping it this dark, disgusting environment.
But also, Theo, you like talk about the house as well, because like the kind of set that we found for it, or that Theo found for it, was just this like horrendous abandoned house. And maybe that, we maybe that's something like, just by the fact that we found this house, that kind of brought out a lot of the darkness that maybe, you know, we thought about, but kind of like, yeah, I don't know, things like that, like finding a set that kind of just, I don't know, with Theo, you talk about it because it's you found this like amazingly scary house.
It was really important to kind of bring this this sort of dark macabre world to the production design, and initially the intention was to set the film in kind of hidden in suburbia, like a kind of disturbing version of suburbia, but quite in reality, quite set in reality. However, the tone kind of changed as obviously films do when you start finding the locations and you know, the settings. And we found that we were super lucky to find an incredible location in this house that no one had been in for 10 years. And what that gave us was this amazing kind of backdrop to set the film, which had so many of these amazing textures that we wouldn't have been able to recreate for the budget that we had otherwise. And that helped us really bring and really push this sort of macabre, grisly reality to the film, which I think was really important in that balance between light and dark again.
Okay, and that's brilliant. Was the house haunted?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I don't think it was haunted, but it was like, it did feel pretty scary being in there. I mean, when I first went in, it was like cobwebs floor to ceiling, like crisscrossing, and I'm not really very good with spiders, none of us were, and that was really intense. And I think that Joss has said this a few times, but like being in there felt a bit like a horror movie. You know, we were sort of staying really late into the night and shooting in this house, and there was this, you know, the story was that the old lady had died in there 15 years ago, and you know, no one had been in since.
It's a house that's so creepy. Was the taxidermy stuff already there?
No, that would have been incredible.
That would have been a find. Yeah,
that would have been a real find. No, we with the taxidermy, it was kind of funny. We were actually going to have loads more taxidermy. I mean, the initial problem we had with taxidermy was that we had no money to shoot the film. Really, we were on such a limited budget, so I decided to shoot back in Gloucestershire, which is where I'm from, because it's kind of in the countryside, and there's loads and loads of people that just seem to collect taxidermy. And we posted around on a few groups and managed to get loads of people lending us taxidermy, which was incredible, because otherwise we just wouldn't have been able to hire it because it was so expensive. But we actually there was supposed to be a load more of it, because I managed to get in touch with a museum down the road that was actually part of, I don't know if you saw Dark Tourist on Netflix, but there was one episode that features a museum which is close by to where we shot the film, and it's like a museum of oddities and horror and of disturbing things that have happened. And he's got some really, really horrendous things in there, like has Jimmy Savile's old suit and stuff like that. So it's very, very peculiar, but he has loads of taxidermy, but all of the really deformed taxidermy, like and the creations of, like, you know, where they've sewn monkey's ears onto a giraffe or something, you know. So it's really dark and nasty. And he said we could borrow a load of stuff, but we just ended up having too much.
Okay, so you didn't need the giraffe with the monkey ears then?
I wish we did. Maybe if we make it into a feature, then, you know, we'll get the giraffe with the monkey ears.
Okay, are there any plans to make it into a feature?
Yeah, we're writing it at the moment, which has been a really lovely experience, and is really exciting. Trying to kind of imagine this world as a much longer piece. It's obviously. Sorry, Joss.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's certainly, like, from you asked, you know, the first thing you asked was about, like, oh, the character and, like, the motivations of the character who wants to be stuffed and things. And I think an interesting process for us writing, you know, it's weird to get a question like that now, where we've already thinking now, massively trying to expand, like, what those character motivations are. And we kind of stepped back after we made the short, and we were like, oh, it's very it's a huge thing to want to do for both these characters, and it's actually going to be a huge kind of, like, storytelling task to get it to a convincible stage where you are convinced that these characters will want to go through with it. And you kind of, like, we realize how almost, like, not shallow, but how how unexplained stuff is in the short film through like making this, or through trying to write it into a longer form piece.
Well, I think that with a short, you don't need to, that what's the joy of it is that you're just jumping into a world for a small amount of time. And, so you forgive it. I think in a short film, you forgive things and you allow the fact that there can never be a full explanation of reasons. And so you can suggest to stuff. But I think when writing, trying to write this as a feature, there's so much more pressure to make the characters have believable motivations and reasons, which is the difficult thing to eke out.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I love doing these interviews, because the 20-minute short is so great, but I love to be able to pick your brains to be like, okay, like why is he the way that he is? Because that's just so interesting to learn more about, Also, like you talk about how in the short, sorry, well, how do you say the taxidermist's name? Araminthia?
Araminta.
Okay, so like Araminta.
But how do you know?
Sorry,
but
what do you want to say,
it's
Joss?
interesting because how do you know that that's her name, Daniel? Because I didn't think that that was her name in the short. Am I wrong?
No, it in the credits it says they taxidermist. To be honest, I think South by Southwest cheated a little bit, because in the caption on the filmmakers portal it says Aramintia.
Okay. There you go. Sorry, I was just curious. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
No worries. Now, if you wanted to keep that a mystery, we could just call it the taxidermist. Though, yeah, with how she posts on Craigslist and just gets this dude to want to be stuffed. What was the process like casting this? Like, was it like a similar thing? Like, hey, like who wants to be in this kind of nutty little short musical?
You know what? That's a really good reference. That's a really good comparison, because it absolutely was like that. And I think that, from the beginning, we had loads of, it was quite difficult to get people involved, which is why it took a long time to make. And also why, I ended up doing much more of the production than maybe I would have normally done or hoped to have done, because it was quite difficult we'd never made a film like this before. And, I think, you put all these things down in a document, and I think it took quite a kind of leap of faith for people to kind of understand what it was going to feel like, and what it was going to be. And certainly with casting that was the same. And it's funny, I had a few responses from people that were like absolutely appalled that we were making this film, and that they were like really appalled by the subject matter. So, because I referenced in, I think, the email that I was sending out to people, I referenced the original story with the cannibals, and they were like, oh yeah, I think this is absolutely disgusting this is way too soon to be making a film about such a horrific event. I was like, what are you on about? Like, that was just such a peculiar response. But so it was a bit like that. And I did spend to find Araminta, to find Alison, who plays the taxidermist. It was searching. There's a casting website in the UK called Mandy, and it's you have a whole bunch of selection of people on there, from amateur to professional, and I literally trawled through every single person in the UK from the age of 30 to 50, just so that there was some boundaries, and that's how we found her. And we just absolutely hit the jackpot with Alison, particularly because she was just has this most amazing voice and is a really, really wonderful actress.
And she really like finds that balance of sweet, but also just really manic.
Yeah, I think the sweetness is certainly like amazing, and just definitely really interesting, because I think, yeah, she brought so much to that part, because I think your go-to, and in my head, even when I was writing sort of the songs for her, for that character, in your head, you kind of like, it's hard to get out of the mindset of like a character like that not being like Mrs. Lovett, or not being like the mum from Tangled, or not being one of these kind of crazy mad scientist kind of like figures or whatever. But just as soon as Alison started singing the songs, it was like she has such a like sweet, soaring, like beautiful voice, not the kind of like witch's cackle that you kind of expect from a character like that. And yeah, so it just brings like really something to that character that is that is like really special, and we're so lucky to have found her for sure. And you know, other people we've talked to after seeing the short have said like, oh, that moment when she first starts singing, because it's so sweet, you kind of feel like you're with her and you can relate to her, and it's not like she's like a kind of manic crazy person, because like she's so relatable and you're really in her head, and she has such a sweet voice.
Now, going back a sec, for that cannibals thing you keep referencing, when did that happen? Because I'm just curious when too soon is too soon.
It's definitely not too soon. I think it's like, I'm going to Google it right now, but I swear it was like 20 years ago or something.
Okay, because I mean, I think the cutoff is like 10 years.
Yeah, like come
Maybe
on,
even
everything
one.
is. It was
Everything's...
maybe even 1 year. I think it's absolutely fine. It was 2001, so we're a good 20 years past.
Too soon. Too soon.
Yeah, just way too soon, man. Like I'm appalled. I'm gonna just hang up right now. Jeez. Joss, you mentioned sorry, what's Helena Bonham Carter's character in
Mrs. Lovett?
Yeah, for musical references, I definitely got like Sweeney Todd vibes in its rhythm, and like there's also a little opera in there. What were some of your musical references?
Yeah, I think I've obviously definitely like, it's like almost impossible nowadays to make a musical and not reference like Sondheim in a way, or not have Sondheim as a reference. And we're making a horror musical, so I think just like by the nature of its like of its kind of the nature of its genre, it's just it kind of lends on some Sweeney Todd. But I think a lot of my references, or our references that we talked about, were like kind of like Bernard Herrmann kind of scores, like those kind of old sort of 30s kind of scores, because they're like really, you know, they're really quite dark, but also like really like sickly sweet. You know what I mean? Like when you hear some of like kind of Bernard Herrmann's Hitchcock scores, they have like two sides to them, and one is kind of like atonal and kind of clangy and dissonant and kind of difficult to listen to, and the other side is like almost like saccharine. And I think that's kind of where our film sits, in that kind of like middle ground between being like a sickly sweet love story and a kind of disturbing, scary thing, and you could kind of take it either way. Yeah, and there's a bunch of other stuff in there. I think there's a couple of Stravinsky pieces that I kind of was taking as kind of textual references as well. Oh, and we also talked about, Theo, we also talked like a lot about some, I think you mentioned before, like some more kind of contemporary soundtrack stuff, like some kind of Johnny Greenwood and things like that. I think there's kind of references like that in there, like his kind of like There Will Be Blood soundtrack and stuff, because there was the nature in which we recorded it, which was all like kind of close mic'd violins and stuff. It's all like very scratchy and woody. We don't have kind of the budget to have like a lush orchestra all in one space. We have to kind of like close mic record everything in a room, which makes it very kind of like earthy and stuff like that. So those kind of like more kind of scratchy contemporary soundtracks kind of were part of it.
I think it was trying to find something as well that was very dissonant and intense. And I think that when trying to, you know, the role or the goal for us right from the beginning was to try and move away from traditional sounds from a musical. Now, obviously, there is Sweeney Todd and there are plenty of dark musicals out there, but I think trying to come up with something that sounded right for our world and the world we wanted to make. And the very first reference that we listened to, I think, was Johnny Greenwood, There Will Be Blood soundtrack. And there's an amazing chugging, dark, intense, cinematic sound to some of that music that makes you feel really, really uncomfortable. And I think that was definitely the first reference that we sort of pinned down and went, okay, this is really, really interesting. Let's see where this builds from and how we can kind of build that out. So I think that, you know, coming from as you say, Joss, from a slightly more contemporary sound was the beginning and the main reference point for us. And then obviously, you know, as with everything, there's all of your references that you love that kind of seep into it.
But I think also it's like especially as far as like musical theatre goes, like I think a lot of musical theatre kind of leans quite heavily on more sort of like contemporary pop references and stuff like that. which I think we were very desperate to avoid, because not that there's nothing wrong with that and it works really well, but I think we both kind of wanted to make something that felt kind of like and kind of timeless in a way, because it kind of feels, I don't mean timeless in like, oh, it's so good it will be remembered, but I mean like timeless in a kind of, it's not really set like in a specific time, because it's kind of like a fairy tale, and I think there's a part of us that kind of wanted to make something that felt like a fairy tale as well. And so I think musically as well, there's nothing in there that I was trying to avoid, like kind of references to like, yeah, to like pop music or any of those kind of genres. There's about 8 bars that has a drum kit in it, because I just couldn't help myself. But outside of that, it's like all kind of orchestral score, basically. Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's neat that we keep referencing fairy tale, and everyone thinks, oh, Disney as in fairy tale. But I mean, I know that you guys are like, no, this is Brothers Grimm. This is old Germany kind of fairy tale.
100%. I've still like, I remember it's why I used to go around my grandma's house, and she had this really old book of Brothers Grimm fairy tales. And they were grim, and the book was grim. And I remember the whole process of her like opening this creaky old book and reading one of these horrible, like, you know, at the time as a kid, you know, these awful, like really stressful visual fairy tales. And so, yeah, I definitely think that there's that tone in it. I think when you go back to the countryside as well, this is obviously a very broad statement, but, you know, growing up in the countryside, there's always like the kind of creepy houses right at the end of the path that no one ever goes near, and like a rumor about what happened in them. And I love those. I think that was definitely a big starting point.
Okay. I don't have like an old creepy book that you're referencing, but I'm pretty sure I have a Brothers Grimm book somewhere behind me, somewhere. Oh,
it's
no,
great. I mean, the stories are
do.
like, I've been rereading them recently, and it's fascinating because the stories that when you write, it's this really interesting thing when you write a fairy tale. There are these kind of rules where you avoid any unnecessary or particularly descriptive information. A fairy tale is quite a fascinating, specific thing where it only deals with the facts and what happens. So it's like when you read them back, it's like they so often end with, or in the middle of them, the prince comes and asks the woman to marry him, and she says yes immediately. It's all immediate and yes, and everything drives the plot forward. It's fascinating.
That's so true. Also, it kind of stays on the fairy tale aspect, but just like in terms of inspiration, I just had this written down here as a lyric. And if it is just a spoiler, I can cut it. But they sing "Creation and Creator, this is our legacy." Like, I'm not gonna sing it, but I really feel like that captures like kind of the essence of Frankenstein's kind of arc in a way. If you wanted to speak to just, as well as I think we've already spoken to her dark obsession, but just maybe the inspiration, a bit more about the inspiration behind her as well.
Yeah, I think that the love between them is definitely like a kind of like that classic thing of like someone falling in love with their own creation, for sure. But to be honest, I'm not sure that's something we'd really spoken about a huge amount before we started writing it. But it definitely feels like that. And I remember that line sticking out, actually. I remember I think we talked about it quite a lot, Theo. Do you remember?
I don't.
Creation and creator. I don't know.
I think
we both thought it kind of stuck out, even though it works. But
for her, obviously the original sort of world that this was based on, with Armin, but there's very much a sexual fetish behind the whole thing, and it was very much driven by this complete desire to do something that he knew he'd get caught, and he knew that it would never end well, but he needed to do it. With Araminta, that was not the case in the slightest. But I think that within the sort of taxidermy,
is Armin the cannibal?
Yes, sorry, Armin was the cannibal in that cannibal story.
No worries, sorry, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and but anyway, when it comes to the taxidermist, what's kind of fascinating when you dive into the world of taxidermy is that all of these taboos and strange rules exist within it. So I met with a taxidermist beforehand, and they were talking with quite disdain about other taxidermists that break the rules and that kind of do these taboo subjects. And, you know, for example, the giraffe with the monkey ears, fixing those sorts of animals together is seen by many taxidermists as like something that you just don't do. I think that there is a sense that you have a responsibility as a taxidermist, because you are bringing something back to life. And for example, the guy that I was speaking to was talked about his previous days when he was a young taxidermist, doing people's pets. And he doesn't do that anymore because there was so much emotion attached to doing people's pets and animals, because obviously they're part of the family, that he couldn't do them because they would never be what those people expected. So I think there's all of these taboos and rules that sit within it. And of course, there's an illegal animal trade as well. There's lots of protected animals, and there's, you know, obviously we know all about the hunters in America that kind of keep them as like trophies and things. So I think all of that world kind of mashes together to become something that is understandable, that someone might want to do this to a human. It's never really been done before. There's a couple of examples. There's one guy who's taxidermied in a British museum, and I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, but his head isn't on display anymore because it's too wrinkled and shriveled, but he's one of the only people that it's ever been done to. So I think that's definitely, you know, that's where, for me anyway, her kind of character comes from. I think, you know, it's a really fascinating world. And I think also for her, the big decision over whether or not, you know, that the crux of the film is the decision on whether she wants to carry on with her passion, or if she's going to let, or passion or career, or whether she's going to let love fall, or you know, a man change that path or get in the way.
In the writing process, do you guys get the story beats down first and then the lyrics, or how does that process work?
Yeah, how it worked for this one, again, I think it's, you know, for us, like trying to turn it into a longer thing, we're doing it differently, and we've done it differently in the past and stuff. But I think for this one, we kind of worked out very specifically what the story beats were, and kind of worked out, well, we're going to have a song here. Together we worked out we're going to have a song here that needs to serve the function of like taking us in the story from this point to this point, or by the end of this song, the character needs to be here, and these are the things it needs to include. And then here's a sort of like template of some influences and some things how we want it to sound. And then I went away and just kind of wrote those songs and wrote the lyrics, and actually did it just as one thing from start to finish, basically. Yeah,
and then
but
I
then
built
also
the script around that. So it's a really lovely process, really, where it was, you know, once we'd worked out those things, as Joss said, and the key references, it's like Joss went away, and then I obviously start getting tracks back from Joss, which is just amazing. And like, it's just such a great experience. Like, you know, you kind of imagine this world, and certainly for me, working in this way where, you know, you get this like incredible piece of music back with all these amazing lyrics, and you can kind of then weave that into the script, is just brilliant.
But we were also like, it wasn't like after I'd written it that was kind of set in stone. We allowed it to be kind of malleable. Like I think after like the first we did kind of like a couple of reshoots, but I mean, we did a couple of reshoots because like there was, we watched it back with people, and people had said like, oh, we need to hear from her at the end. Like, because I think in the original thing, the last moment that you hear them sing is in the bath, before whatever happens there happens. No spoilers. And then there was no kind of singing after that. But I think people were like, we decided that we wanted to kind of hear from her at the end, so then we added moments to that. And I think there were things that we changed afterwards, right? And then we went and reshot, basically.
Totally. I think it has to be a flexible, you know, there's a nice kind of flexible process with the whole thing, especially working in sort of such close proximity like this. You know, the music becomes as important as the dialogue. You know, that's the kind of the key thing with writing a script like this. Is it's not, you know, they're not two separate things. And that's I think often where musical films fall apart as well. You know, songs are, you know, huge pieces that happen, and then action is just kind of driven to, you know, it's just like filled in the gaps, like get to A to B, get to these two different songs that kind of sing about the subject matters or the feelings that people are feeling. Whereas I think that what we wanted to try and do was tie these songs in so that they really feel embedded in the story. You know, they feel very natural to the story, and also they replace some of the dialogue. You know, I think that the rises and falls come from the music as much as the film, and that's really important.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think that is.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to
you...
say. I was just going to say, and lyrically, I think that what Theo was saying, like lyrically, is kind of why what I think it makes it most rewarding and makes it the most challenging is the fact that you also need them to be like saying dialogue and saying very specific things. So you have to like work out which chemicals and products are used in taxidermy, and then what words rhyme with those products and stuff like that, which is like a very fun process for sure.
Okay, because yeah, what rhymes with formaldehyde?
I don't know, but tanning oil kind of rhymes with lice oil, which are both things that they use.
Ooh, okay. Now, Theo, you're not like a credited lyricist on this, but did you have any like say into the lyrics after you got that copy back?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a few things. You know, I should say that this process particularly, this film particularly started, we did it so quickly because it started as a 2-week test project where we hadn't made anything in a while. And we sat down, I was like, Joss, you write these songs in 2 weeks, and then I'll take 2 weeks to shoot it, and then we'll just do it. So it was supposed to be something that we just sort of like flippantly, you know, just threw out. And then obviously we started writing it. We were super excited about it, and it just snowballed into this like project that we were super passionate about. So I think it was like there wasn't a massive amount of development process, but I think I had a few, there's definitely a few changes here and there that we made throughout, but I can't think of any specific lyrics that I came in with for this one.
Yeah, I think I can't think of anything specific either, but we definitely like talked about things, why things were working, why things weren't, and we changed stuff accordingly.
I think as with everything, it's like the process of making any film, but especially something that has to work as a musical, is getting it down and seeing how it feels and seeing how it works and being able and flexible enough to make those changes. So like Joss said, we only did one reshoot, but we did one reshoot at the end because we felt like we needed a tiny bit extra from her. We wanted to hear from her right at the end. And I think allowing, and you know, throughout the film there, you know, the song has been manipulated and changed from what Joss originally wrote to allow more time. And I think that's the whole, you know, obviously the whole editing process and the whole creative process is allowing yourself to sort of stretch the project out and feel what works and what doesn't. I think also what really helped is for this, I storyboarded, of course, the whole thing, but then put that into an edit as well. So had a kind of boardomatic that was to the music of the whole film, which really allowed us to kind of get a sense and feel for which bits worked and you know, where the emphasis were.
With staying on the music for a sec, I saw in the credits that you guys are both credited with additional vocals. Where can we hear you guys in the film?
It's in that bit where she got at the start where she goes on the computer and she gets all the weird responses through. Yeah, we're in there somewhere, both of us. Did you remember what your line was that you kept in there, Theo?
What about, it's something like, no, I don't.
I think you are. I know. You are. You're a freak.
You're a freak. Can't you see?
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
that's the one that you've got in there. Because I think originally, like, it was all me, as in like the original take, and when we shot on set to it and stuff, it was just me singing all the parts, which I loved because I'm an egomaniac. But then I think we decided that we needed different voices, and then I think it was just we got a few of our friends.
I don't think we decided that. I think that was always going to be the case. I know, but there was a fleeting moment where I said, well, okay, well, when are we recording these other voices? And just went, what? Why can't they just all be me?
I was gonna say, if you guys need voices for the feature, I could be like, no, it's too soon.
We'll keep you in mind, Daniel. We'll give you a shout when we're ready.
Okay, so Theo Rhys, a director and co-writer, and Joss Holden-Rea. Yeah, that's how you say it. Joss Holden-Rea, co-writer and composer and lyricist for Stuff, the short taxidermy musical inspired by a German cannibal. That's the new
Beautifully
headline,
put.
I think.
Beautifully put.
Awesome. Thank you guys for chatting with me on the Film Crazy Show.
Thanks so much,
Thanks very
Daniel.
much for
It's been an
having us.
absolute
It was fun.
pleasure.